Hi, everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis, a breaking news reporter here at Forbes. Joining me now is Charles Lipson. He's a professor emeritus at the University of Chicago. He also writes columns for outlets such as The Spectator magazine, Real Clear Politics, and others, and they are available at charleslipson.com. And he's also the author of Free Speech 101, a guide for students. Charles, thank you so much for coming on. I appreciate our conversation once again.
It's always great to talk with you, Brittany.
This week, all eyes are on Tuesday night, the first debate between Vice President Kamala Harris and former President Donald Trump airs Tuesday night at 9 p.m. What are you looking out for?
I'm sort of trying to think about what each candidate should do and should avoid doing. And I think there's a kind of obvious list for both candidates. They begin with Trump needing to stay disciplined, focus on policy, particularly immigration, crime, lower real incomes, inflation, those kinds of issues, and avoid rambling and avoid personal attacks. In Kamala Harris's case, I think she's going to need fundamentally to show that she's capable of being the country, the leader of the free world and the leader of the country. She's been in a number two position, and she really needs to show that she has policies, and she'll have to defend herself against the claim that she's not just changed her policies in order to win elections, but that we really don't know what her policies would be after she is elected. Can anybody trust what she says now, given that she said one thing before, one thing now, and she's given no reasons for changing? She hasn't said, well, I've looked at the cost of energy, and I believe that fracking is important now, or offshore drilling, things she's opposed in the past. For example, she should be asked, would you, knowing what you know now, would you have approved the Keystone pipeline? Something very concrete. That brings us to the third point. I think that the moderators are under the gun here. They have to show that whatever their personal opinions are, they are unbiased as moderators. And they have to, which I think that the CNN moderators did last time. They're all very much against Trump. They really don't like him. But they were very good in terms of appearing neutral in that broadcast. That was their job. I think the second thing that the moderators have to do is press for follow-up questions. I think the weakness of the Dana Bash interview with Kamala Harris was that the absence of follow-up questions. If you ask only the initial questions, not to people like me who are not practiced politicians, but to a practiced politician, she's worked on her answer. She has a canned answer. You know this as a reporter. If you don't ask the next two or three questions, you don't get beyond the canned answer. And that's what we need to hear from Kamala Harris. And we need to hear it without a word salad. That's her big danger.
So let's talk about the moderators first. What questions do you think are must-asks tomorrow night?
Well, I think that they should focus on policy. And in particular, they should focus on the big issues where one side or the other has a major advantage. So the obvious issues are inflation in the economy, crime, the border, where they have big policy differences as well, abortion rights, reproduction rights, call them what you will, health care. I think both candidates have proposals that would blow out the budget, huge deficits. And I think they have very different responses for how to deal with that. And I think they should press on that. the more they press Trump to look backwards at the 2020 election, the more they are in effect showing bias. This is an election about the future. Harris is right about that. Uh, and I think Harris is, with the help of the media, done something quite brilliant. She has managed to skip over the last decade of her life in public affairs as a senator and now vice president and depict herself, and this is amazing, depict herself as an outsider when she is the kind of quintessential insider. And she's managed to depict Trump as the candidate of the past without Trump being able to say, as he should, are you better off now? This past that you refer to that was so awful, are you better off? Weren't you better off then? So I think there's a lot for the moderators to do. But if they don't press follow-up questions, and if they do look biased, they will have blown their opportunity and reinforced the public's mistrust of the media.
I want to go over the rules of this debate and talk about who they benefit. It's going to look a lot like the CNN debate we saw in June between President Joe Biden and former President Donald Trump. It's 90 minutes long with no live audience, no pre-written notes. There's muted mics when the candidate isn't speaking. There aren't opening statements. Trump and Harris cannot ask each other questions. Each get 2 minutes to answer questions, 2 minutes for a rebuttal, and 1 minute for a follow-up or response. And Donald Trump won the coin toss, so he's giving the final closing statement. What do you make of these rules, and who do you think, if anyone, they're in favor of?
I think the rules are quite fair. They may benefit Trump in the sense that he would be the most likely person to interrupt. I don't think it's a good thing that they can't ask each other questions. I think the best way to do that, consistent with the rules, would be to let each candidate submit 1 or 2 questions to the moderators to ask. Mr. Trump asked you this question, Madam Vice President. Former President Trump, Vice President Harris asked you this question. That would be quite reasonable to do. I think it's a good thing that they don't have opening statements. Those are canned and you never learn anything. They're just another stump speech. And we'll get the stump speech at the very end. They've already done that. But I think the heart of the debate will be whether or not we really can get, whether she can get under his skin, which is one of her real goals, and whether Trump can maintain any discipline, which he's had a hard time doing, even in friendly interviews.
I know you have that scorecard of what each candidate should and should not do, but if we remember back to June during that disastrous debate for President Biden, most people I talked to came to the consensus that it wasn't necessarily a win for Donald Trump. The debate was just such a loss for Joe Biden. It really overshadowed any performance by Trump. So now, tomorrow night, September 10th, what does a win look like for Donald Trump, and what does a win look like for Kamala Harris?
I completely agree with the assessment that you just laid out. In a 2-person contest, though, if the other side loses, you win. But I think the point was that Trump didn't so much capture a win as he was gifted it by Joe Biden's loss. And I think that both candidates will be looking for that in the next debate. I think that the really interesting question is whether they can stay focused on policy. I think both candidates have policy issues that they really think they can be ahead on, and I think that the public needs to know what those issues are, and I think they need to be locked in. I want to say one thing about the way that the Democrats coalesced around Kamala Harris, because I don't think that this point has made it out into the public discussion. Everybody talked about the incredible discipline that the Democrats showed, not only at the convention, which I thought was a big success for the Democrats, but in in rounding up around Kamala Harris so quickly rather than having any debate. Everybody has talked about that, but they've missed one crucial point. If Kamala Harris had needed to put forward her positions in order to win the Democratic nomination, she would be on record with a lot of these far left positions very close to the general election. Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer really helped her avoid that. So she's not on record recently opposing fracking, opposing offshore drilling, in favor of eliminating all internal combustion engines, opposing all of Trump's measures on the border, and so forth. Those are all positions she's taken, but she took them 4 years ago. The Democrats wisely avoided putting her on record now. So now, of course, she's flip-flopping. But the question is, can they pin her down on it? Bernie Sanders' comment this weekend was really damaging to her. Bernie said, well, of course she's going to the center right now. She wants to win the election. But he left open the possibility that it's all a fraud.
Bernie Sanders, in that interview, also commented on some pretty big news last week. Kamala Harris picked up some pretty conservative endorsements from former Congresswoman Liz Cheney and former Vice President Dick Cheney. Not only are they endorsing her, they're voting for her. What do you make of that, and how helpful is that, do you think, to the Harris campaign?
I don't think it helps the Harris campaign, but I think it does show something very important about the Republican Party. The Republican Party today is not the Republican Party of George H.W. Bush. It's not internationalist, it's not interventionist, it's not really a free trade party. And it's much more populist, nationalist, America first. That Trump remolded the party. And what you see essentially are sore losers. And they're speaking out because Trump they know they're out of Trump's party. They're not going to be appointed to a cabinet position or anything else. So Adam Kinzinger and Liz Cheney and so forth couldn't win a Republican primary in any red state or any red district. I think it's hard to know whether Dick Cheney's comments are really because of these policy differences or because he's defending his daughter, as you would want a father to do. Liz Cheney has gotten a lot of incoming flack from Donald Trump, and that's all understandable. There's a split in the Democratic Party as well. The split is really between the very vocal progressives, who are very anti-Israel. They're very much open border. They don't like jailing criminals and so forth, and the center left of the party. But basically, that's what I'm saying, that Kamala Harris really associated herself with that very progressive wing in trying to win the nomination in 2020. She didn't even get it. She had such low poll numbers that she had to withdraw before the Iowa caucuses, but she has avoided being stuck with those positions so far because of the way that the Democrats coalesced around her and because the media has just been brown-nosing uh, her candidacy over, I think, their journalistic responsibilities.
Her policies weren't up on her campaign website before or during the DNC. They are up, though, now before the debate. So people have a chance to look at those, dive into them ahead of seeing her on stage with Trump. As of right now, a New York Times Siena poll shows Trump ahead by Harris in a head-to-head matchup by 1 point. Other national polls show Harris up by a hair. What do you make of these numbers, A? And B, bringing it back to the debate, how important is this debate on Tuesday?
The debate is very important. I actually think it's important for both candidates, but I think it's particularly important for Harris because voters already know Trump. Now, he can reinforce the bad things they know about him, or he can reinforce the good things they know, but they just have a less resolved picture. They have a 100-dot picture of Harris. They have a 600-dot picture of Trump. What do I think of her putting up the policies now? She put them up a day before the debate. What do you think of that? That means she can't. She's going to try to blunt the idea. Oh, you don't have any policies. You've never stated them. But by the same token, you've gotten them up so recently that it's hard for the other side to really assess all of them. Some of Harris's policies, like taxing unrealized capital gains, are just lunacy. But Trump would be a budget buster with his stuff. The main difference there is that all of Trump's big policies are about giving voters back their own money and letting them spend it to rev up the economy, and lessening regulations that seem to be a net negative for the economy. That is, they impose very high costs for very low benefits. Harris is a typical Democratic policy. Whatever we want to do, we're going to give money to people to do it. So we want more new homeowners, so we're going to give them money, and so forth. So these are very strikingly different approaches, and I think that that's what the debate ought to concentrate on.
Well, Charles, there's certainly a lot to look forward to for Tuesday night's debate, and we will be watching. We will be back to break it all down. But Charles Lipson, per usual, thank you so much for the conversation.
It's always my pleasure, Brittany. These conversations are so much fun.